You are listening to the APSE podcast, the Association of People Supporting Employment First, with your host, Chris Davies.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back. We are finally back together again for our second Minnesota APSE podcast. It's so great to see everybody today. Appreciate you checking in with us. Very fortunate today to be here with Barb Ziemke of the Pacer Center. Say hi, Barb.
Hey, everyone. So glad to join you today.
And we're going to get more into who Barb is and what she's all about in just a minute. Just wanted to go over a couple of quick things with you since we haven't had a podcast in a while. I know for you avid Minnesota APSE followers that watch our podcast religiously, you know that at the end of the last podcast, I mentioned that Alicia Munson would be our next attendee for the podcast. And I think we all know that COVID-19 hit in a big way, and we're all living in this pandemic time, which is it's certainly a cliche, but it's true. It's unparalleled times, like things we've never felt in our lifetimes anyway. And so we, along with everybody else, had to kind of reassess what we were going to do next. And we've all been working mostly from home, as many of you have. And we thought about, well, what would be the best appropriate, podcast subject for now. And we thought it would be really good to talk today about families and individuals and kind of what they're, facing during this pandemic and how they're surviving, and not only surviving, but thriving, and talk about that and what are people actually doing to access employment services and to find jobs and to stay on the job during this time, and how are they getting their information, making their decisions, and all those kinds of things, and just have a real conversation with somebody whose opinion we really respect, quite a bit in Barb Ziemke. And before we get into you, Barb, I just want to sort of remind everybody a little bit more about Minnesota APSE and what we stand for. It's become a tradition for our podcast for me to tell you what our purpose statement is, and we're very proud of it and really believe it and stand behind it. So before we go any further, I'd like to tell you what Minnesota APSE stands for. We are an action-oriented organization, and we exist to bring people together to raise expectations so that people with disabilities can be employed and contribute and assume their roles and responsibilities as citizens in their communities. At Minnesota APSE, we believe that employment is the same wages, standards, responsibilities, expectations, and opportunities available to any working adult. We believe one person at a time, employment is the avenue out of poverty and isolation. So that's just a little bit more about Minnesota APSE, who we are and what we stand for. I'm very proud to be a part of this organization and to be on the board of Minnesota APSE as well as a couple of their committees, such as the Communication Committee, which leads me to you here today. So with no further ado, I'd like to introduce our special guest here today and have her tell us a little bit more about herself. Barb has such a long title, I'm not even going to try to even approach it. I asked her what it was just a moment ago when we were preparing and realized that I wasn't even going to attempt that one. So I'm just going to turn it over to you, Barb, for a few minutes to introduce yourself.
Okay, well, thanks so much, Chris, and I'm really happy to have been asked to be a part of this today. APSE is an important organization in that it really aligns with Pacer's philosophies and objectives around high expectations for everyone with and without disabilities, inspiring possibilities, really focusing on inclusion and meaningful participation in every part of life, and the importance of work for all of us as citizens and individuals. So it's great to be a part of this conversation today in light of the exceptional challenges all of us, both those who work in the field and those of us who are family members, and then those, of course, that we're here on behalf of, which is individuals with unique gifts and skills and abilities, and also unique challenges that we all want to support in being successful. So I'm from Pacer Center, and just quickly for those of you who haven't heard of us, Pacer's been around for about 40 years. We are the state's parent training and information center that's partially funded through the Individuals for Disabilities Education Act to help families of children with all disabilities, we're not disability specific, navigate special education, anything to do with getting the services and supports that they need to live those meaningful and full lives, including educational services. So I went to Pacer Center about 19 years ago and was one of those special education parent advocates, where we all have some training in one field or another that's related, but we all also are parents of children or young adults, and now, because many of us stay at Pacer a long time, older adults with disabilities. So we kind of have a dual kind of perspective that I think is what attracted me as a parent when I first contacted Pacer around making sure my son Brandon, who's now in his early 30s, who has an intellectual and developmental disability, I wanted to be sure that I could be the best advocate possible for him to live an inclusive life, starting with inclusive education. So my passion for the work that I do comes from Brandon. He's my role model. He's taught me everything I know about all of this. So I kind of wish he could be on the podcast today, but I did speak to him, and I'm going to share a little bit about Brandon's wisdom about how to navigate this really challenging time. So my title, which I did not author, my predecessor did, at Pacer about 4 years ago, in recognition that we don't do as good a job as we should with what happens to children and young adults once they leave public education, many times at age 21 for those with significant disabilities, and face what we call the transition cliff. And so we wanted to build a better bridge to help families primarily ensure that they didn't fall off that cliff, that there was something on the other side. And a big part of that is employment. I'll just say for Brandon, from the time he got his first real paycheck as part of a work study kind of setup that he had in, I think, 9th grade, got that first paycheck through Tree Trust, I think. He was motivated to work. And we have seen such benefits. It has been a life changer for him. And the families that I talk to, that is true for most of the families I talk to as well. So there really is a need for us to be committed to this together to make it happen. So at Pacer, we started the National Parent Center on Transition and Employment. So we go broader than Minnesota. And I co-direct that program now. And as a part of that, I get to talk and email with and do workshops with a lot of families with kids, young adults, and primarily we work through about age 28, I would say, although we don't turn anybody away, to direct them in the right, to the right kinds of resources and supports that they need. So that's a little bit about me and what we do. And I'll let Chris tell me what he wants to talk about next.
That's great. Well, thank you so much, Barb. And the title is definitely worthy of its length because the impact you and Pacer Center has on families and individual lives is really immeasurable. So it's great to have you on today. And you and I go kind of way back.
Yeah.
You know, at least sort of way back. You know,
Yeah.
at my age, it's not that long ago now, but I think you and I originally met, and I met Brandon about 10 or 12 years ago.
Yeah.
And so it's really special to be able to reconnect with you here today.
Yes. And you were part of the big picture of success. And I always tell families too, it's not a one-time deal. You get the job of your dreams. It's a progression for all of us.
Yes,
and you and Kaposia was an we're an important part of that process. So,
well,
yeah,
thank you. That's nice of you to say, but it's all Brandon.
Well, it actually
it's all
is.
Brandon. So, okay, so let's get into it. So, the first topic I'd like to kind of hear you talk about is sort of what are families doing, during this time. What kind of, concerns, challenges are they running into in terms of specifically when we're talking about returning to work or looking for work? What are you hearing from families right now as we're living in this pandemic?
Right. It's a really challenging time for all families, both educationally and just in all aspects of community life. I think that for families of individuals with disabilities, it's like you have all the same kinds of concerns, but they're just really amplified. They're really magnified. I sometimes say it's like they're on steroids. So, I'm hearing a variety of responses, just like you would in the general population. The level of concern over COVID varies from family to family. And Chris, I know when we were talking earlier, this kind of like no judgment zone language came up that, when I'm talking to families, I'm just reminded all the time how we all need to suspend judgment, because unless we hear the backstory, we have no way of knowing why people are making the decisions that they're making. So I'm hearing a variety of things from families, but I will say in general, almost every family I talk to, COVID has been, a hot topic as far as the challenge it is already for families and individuals to balance out the kind of dignity of risk issues of we really want to not limit the opportunities with health and safety issues, and how that has always been challenging, but now it's even more challenging, partly because I think there's such it's so hard right now to get the information that you need, because you hear every kind of an opinion out there. And so families are really grappling with, how do I know what's the right thing to do? Having concerns over, am I balancing out this risk versus safety, what's good for and what's the individual wants? And then almost having to do a risk versus benefits analysis, because it's more than just health and safety. Your job provides lots of benefits. And so, if I lose this job for the long run, how will this affect me? So families are really grappling with, how do I make the right decision, I would say, overall. And I have some examples I'll share a little bit later, but I would say that's kind of the big issue for families is, considering if they don't go to work or if they don't continue to find a job now and they're a young person, how will that affect the trajectory for the future of employment? Beyond the health and safety, they're thinking, how does this affect their mental health if they're just at home and not going out? Their loss of motivation perhaps over work, or skill regression. Those are all real concerns of families.
Yeah, I can appreciate all of that. And I know just from being involved in the provider community, hearing from a lot of folks that provide support support services to folks, that mental health piece during this time has really been huge. And it's been not that we wouldn't always, our providers or support people wouldn't always think holistically about somebody's overall health and what each individual person might need. But during this time, we've noticed that that's become really to the forefront of the kind of support people have been wanting and needing, and we'll definitely get more into that as well. Well, Brandon, if you're watching, I want to personally thank you for allowing us to sort of dive into your journey a little bit here today. As your mom said, she would love that you were here, as would I. But we appreciate you giving her permission to talk a little bit about your journey. And so specifically, Barb, I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about, specifically Brandon's journey during this time and sort of how he has navigated the pandemic and his employment decisions that he's had to make and sort of how he's navigated this time.
Sure, thank you. And you know, he can't be here because he's working.
That's a great reason. Thank you for saying that.
It's a little bit of spoiler, but he hasn't been working all through this. So I'll just tell a little bit of our story. Brandon was really fortunate to get to go to a post-secondary education program called Beyond Limits, which is for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities on a college campus. That was life-changing for him. And as a part of that, he got a job in the campus cafeteria. He loves working with food. He loves food. And he was able to keep that job after he left the program. And he was also able to move out of the family home into an apartment that he shares with a roommate. And so his situation at the time COVID hit was that he was living in an apartment away from our home, but in this area. And the school cafeteria closed down because they had to shut down the campus and go to all online when that hit at the end of March. So that job went away. And then Brandon also works part-time, 1 day a week, because of the college component, at a local grocery. And he had to make a decision because they stayed open about was he going to go back to work there. And then when the school reopened here in the summer, he also had a decision to make about going back to his cafeteria job. So we're very involved in, we use a supported decision-making kind of process with Brandon. And so we see our role as just really helping him to process things and make informed decisions. And so we wanted to support him in this. So we had lots of discussions about it. I will say, I'm the kind of parent and person that for a variety of reasons would be seen as overprotective. I kind of wish everybody just wore a helmet all the time. I drive my husband crazy. So I am very safety conscious and have to really work hard to pull back in that area. We also have a family member living in our home who's very high risk for COVID because of an underlying health issue. So we had a lot of different things to kind of take into consideration because Brandon still comes home, you know, he'll come home for a weekend, or if his roommate's gone, he'll spend time with us. So I want you to know, if you're watching today and you're from a family, I'm just trying to say we had a lot of the same kinds of concerns that I'm hearing from a lot of families, and it was really hard to make decisions, and it was really hard to let Brandon make his own decisions about some of these issues with our support. I was so proud of him though. We said, what do you want to do about your grocery store job? And he said, you know, when I work there right now, my job there is, he's just working in the aisles throughout the store, kind of straightening, dusting, sweeping, doing that kind of thing. He said, there's so many strangers coming in, so many people, and a lot of them don't wear their masks. This was earlier on, and they're not really respecting the distance thing. And I feel like since it's only 1 day a week, and transportation is kind of an issue for that one, that I should just see if I can just not go for a while. So we supported that, and the employer was great, you know, said, if that's what you want to do, we support that. Then the cafeteria job opened back up, and Brandon needed to make a decision. I will tell you, my first thought was, I don't want him in that kitchen, close quarters, lots of people working together. But so the first step was, I said, we need to find out how they're opening up and what's that going to look like, Brandon, and then that'll help you make a decision. So we learned there were only 3 people on a crew at one time. They were all going to wear masks. They were going to have distancing things in place. And Brandon said, I really want to go back to work. So we said, okay, we'll try it, because you really don't know how this is going to work until you try it. So that's what we decided to do. So Brandon's been working back in his one job since they opened that back up, I think June, early June. And he is so happy to be able to go to work today. And as I talk to other parents, and the other parents who share stories I'll share too, I will say a common denominator when they were able to go back to work, which not everyone was just how not only was the work important for work's sake, but it seems to elevate their like their other skills, their independent skills even, and their confidence level in other areas as well. So, you know, Brandon's a happier camper when he's working. And I think that's probably true for most of us who have jobs that we really enjoy. So that's the Brandon story. He has friends who didn't make those same decisions, but again, they have a different set of circumstances. So, you know, I can answer questions at this point, or I can share a few more examples if that would be helpful.
Well, first, I just want to say that I really appreciate, you know, the way you laid that out, and that going back to what you were saying about it's a sort of a non-judgment zone, and that each person has their own unique, you know, situation. And during this time, we really can't judge what a person or what a family, you know, decides to do. It's what's right for them.
Right.
And I think one of the purposes of this podcast today is to talk about some examples of how people have made decisions and what they're doing, and also talk about what is possible so people can decide for themselves, you know, if they want to look for a job right now, or to continue working right now. Because just, it's like you said, it's universal, Barb. It's not just about people with disabilities. This is a human thing. And people with disabilities experience life the way all of us do, and find jobs meaningful for the same reasons, you know, anyone does. And so I really appreciate you laying that out. And I can just tell you personally that one of the reasons I'm passionate about this field is an experience, you know, I was going through when I was 25, and I was out of work for 6 months. And I'll never forget the difference I felt just in my overall well-being the day I went back to work, the first day I went back to work and started to work again. So it really does have a tremendous impact one way or the other. And sometimes we don't realize how much we really do value our jobs until we can't go to them.
Right.
So, yeah. So no, I appreciate you telling that. And we're definitely going to get back to more examples. And you had mentioned that you wanted to talk about how families access information. Right. I think we'll switch gears for just a minute before we go back to that, and talk a little bit about, you know, what is out there and what some providers are doing. I'm here today, you know, representing, as you know, Minnesota APSI, and also representing, you know, a variety of employment, customized employment, you know, providers in the Twin Cities. And I'd just like to briefly sort of talk about what many providers are doing right now during this time, because I think some families still might not be, you know, even aware, you know, what's possible and what people are doing. Would you say that's true?
I think it's absolutely true. Yes.
Okay.
So I find great value in what you're going to do now, which is to explain, how does this work?
Great. Yeah. So, well, I know for providers, specifically, we're talking about customized employment providers, and we are talking more about that today because, as I mentioned at the beginning of this podcast, APSI has a very strong belief system in what employment is, and so I'm speaking from that perspective today. But most providers, even, you know, at the onset of the pandemic, didn't stop doing what they were doing. Merely more reacted to what was going on, and it sort of mirrored what the general population was experiencing. So for many providers, many folks that they were working with and working in jobs were furloughed, and so they would react, you know, to that. We at Kaposia and many other providers are providing employment services actively right now. New people are seeking our services, and we're starting work with new people to help them find jobs. And we're very much doing it in a way that, you know, a lot of employers are, and using technologies and sort of a blended, you know, approach. for many of the employment providers out there right now, they are doing a lot of work remotely via things like Zoom and Microsoft Teams, or even just video chat on a phone. So if somebody wanted to look for work, they would work with that employment provider and the specific staff that was working with that individual would do a lot of things remotely, for especially at the beginning. At some point, depending on what everybody's journey is and sort of where they end up wanting to work and the kind of businesses they want to explore, at some point there, is some going out and meeting face to face or having an informational meeting with an employer. You can still do a lot of that with technology if it makes sense, but it's about doing what makes the most sense and doing it in a safe way. So providing or proceeding with safety, in mind. And it means that we, and providers are looking at things in a lot of different ways. Instead of the traditional, perhaps, transportation way where a staff might just go pick somebody up and not really think about it, maybe they meet there and they both get there in a way that is safe for them and that they're both comfortable with. It's much like everything else we've been talking about. It's situation and person by person specific. And it's what makes sense. But the net and the short story is, and there are providers providing employment services, and so we really suggest that if you are interested in employment and interested in exploring employment right now, whether you have a job and you're looking for support, or whether you are wanting to work, that you do informational meetings with, the providers in town, and places like Pacer Center, as well as case managers, can give you all the information you need. You can certainly find information on Minnesota APSE's website as well, www.mnapse.org. So there you go. There's the first time I'm going to say it anyway. And so those things are happening and just sort of happening in a different way. And much like all of us are working in a different way. This pandemic, and not to take it lightly by any means, because it has a real, dramatic effect on a lot of people. And some people, it unfortunately has meant, life and death. And so not that we don't take it seriously at all, but it's changed the way we live. And I'll be very interested to see, going into the future, how much we use what we've learned, during this time. It might not just be business as usual for a long time. So, but yeah, so like I said, the short story is that it is happening. And if you think you're interested, it's worth, meeting with people to find out what they're doing.
Great. And can I interject something there too? I think it's so important for the providers and for the family's benefit to be very specific, paint a picture rather than just give a blurb about the ways that they are ensuring safety. For instance, I went on one website, and it said, we're providing PPE, to all of our workers. Well, PPE, is that even the right acronym? Personal protective equipment, yeah. So, speak plain English, don't use jargon if you're a provider. Don't assume they know what you mean by that. For me as a family member, it's just really helpful to know, they're going to have, one of the families I talked to, it's a cashier. The young person is a cashier. Mm-hmm. And I won't say the name of the individual because I didn't get permission, but it's a young man who, can I use a story to illustrate this point?
Yes.
Okay.
Please do.
So it's a young man who got a brand new job just as this all was hitting at a thrift store that was just going to open. And it was like a mile from his apartment. Everything was so perfect about it, and he really wanted to do it. He's on the autism spectrum though. And he was going to be a cashier, but high sensory, issues around the mask thing, but he just didn't want to say no to that opportunity. So this is where the family, although they usually let this individual take the lead on all of this, did get a little bit involved to help him figure out what were some accommodations I could ask for, and how do we find out what the employer is going to do. and supported him in this kind of interactive discussion with that employer. Well, as it turns out, they requested the accommodation of him not wearing a mask, which is a huge issue around being a cashier right around people. But they did, they were having plexiglass at all of the cashier stands, and they extended that so that he would have, the customer also would have a higher measure of that. They were able to tell him exactly, like, you're going to have gloves, we're going to, you know, make sure everybody wears a mask. So I think sometimes the messages for families, don't make assumptions, find out exactly what this means, you know, and then for the providers, don't make assumptions that people know how great you're doing with how you're providing things. Really say, this is how it will look for this individual on that job. And then I just think getting employers more actively involved in the conversation has been really helpful to the families I talked to. Even one youth asked for an accommodation of including the parent on a phone call, because the parent needed that information as much as this young person did in order to support the decision. So I think, I guess the message is for employment providers to be really clear, and for families not to apologize for needing more information more directly than they might have in the past, when there might have been a support job coach or someone else more actively involved on the ground level.
Yeah, that's a really good message. And, you know, as somebody that does work for a provider, I have to remind myself of that I'm living in the quote unquote jargon, you know, arena. So I know what all the acronyms mean and all those kind of things. And I think really painting a clear picture and more specific story makes a lot of sense. And obviously, until you find the job, you don't know all the answers to that story. But it's about talking about, well, when you do, we're going to, you know, really dive in and get information from the employer and the manager and make sure all your questions are answered and help you adjust to whatever it is that you need. You know, I most of the customized employment providers that I'm really familiar with really focus on each individual and trying to provide whatever the right support is for that person. You know, I have a personal saying that I like to say is you know, we don't want to provide any more support or any less support than somebody needs. It's all about the right amount of support. And you and I, Barb, we get support in ways that we need it too. You know, that's a universal thing, and it's about really being, you know, person-centered. So, but I really appreciate that message very much, especially as one who's a provider and speaks to a lot of families and individuals. And you're right, it's a lot of unique things are happening and sort of how to navigate new jobs. I know a story of one employment support person that literally helped the individual that she was supporting shave because they had a dress code and or a code at the place he was working that you know, he needed to have a certain type of shave, and he typically went to a salon to have that done, and the salons were closed. And so, you know, it's creating all sorts of opportunities to think outside the box, let's just say. So yeah,
that is a benefit. And again, this goes beyond disabilities. Employers have found all kinds of ways to do distance employment when in the past many of them said this is impossible. But I do think a key to the success stories of the people that I've talked to is the ability for whomever is involved, including the family, to be flexible and creative. So often it's about knowing, identifying an accommodation or a support as a possibility, and getting people on board just to give that a try. And, you know, this is a little bit fluid, our conversation, but while I'm thinking about it, I found some really good resources around, you know, if you're kind of struggling with what kind of accommodations could be helpful in making this work for a young person or an adult with a disability. The organization JAN, the Job Accommodation Network, and so askjan.org, has COVID accommodations information where they lay out some really, by category, different solutions based on the different kinds of disabilities and the impact of those disabilities in employment. So there are some good resources out there, I think, to help teams, employers, and families, and the individuals themselves, who are the key to identifying what it is they need to feel both safe and to be able to be productive on their jobs. But sometimes we've, in the past, kind of gone with formula stuff. This is giving us an opportunity, as you said, to go beyond that, to get really creative. And within the customized employment realm, that's what it's all about.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, you know, going back to what you were talking about and asking employers, what are their plans? I think that's really important to dive into that with employers. What are your preparedness plans? And also, are they really, you know, walking the talk of them? It's one thing to have a plan and to have a kind of a canned, you know, set of papers that say we're going to do this and that, but to really find out whether people are walking the talk. And I think that's something that was done pre-COVID, pre-pandemic era, and, you know, in individuals that are seeking employment as they meet with potential employers. You know, customized employment really stresses that you're really interviewing them as much as they're meeting you and finding out, is this a good environment for me? Does this employer have the things that are important to me and that I value and that will be important for my success? And so, yeah, all those things certainly are really important.
And I've encouraged people who are really reluctant and concerned, especially this works well if it's a customer interface kind of setting, you know, just do I don't know what they call that when people go in, secret shopper kind of visit, you know, just go in, because so much in all of this depends on the manager, the supervisor, you know, if it's a chain, it depends on which, you know, store maybe implements things well. You know, go take a visit, see it. There was one young lady who had she'd been promoted from like bagger to cashier at a grocery store, and she just didn't want to stay home. She wanted to go back to that job. She loves that job. And of course, family has concerned, but they were able to just go in and see this grocery store had put everything you could put in place. People actually were standing on the dots in line, you know, socially distancing. They had the plexiglass. Everybody was wearing masks. They had a policy at the door. And that just alleviated the anxiety over that decision. I think it's harder for families when you can't go in and check it out because it's not a customer interface kind of setting. And there is an element of trust. And that's why I think sometimes getting the employer involved as part of the discussion is helpful. One family I talked to said when they voiced some concerns and sent an email, the CEO actually offered to have a discussion with them. That included some of the support personnel and the individual. And as an outcome of that, they felt so relieved of what could have been enough anxiety to keep them from allowing that person who was vulnerable to go into that setting.
Yeah, well, that's a real indicator of how much that particular company values their employees.
Right.
And so, yeah, that's a really good example. I love that idea about sort of being a secret shopper or going someplace, if it's appropriate for the business. Obviously, every business isn't set up that way, but if it's appropriate, being able to go just as an anonymous, you know, visitor, if you will, because then you really do see what the reality is versus if somebody's putting on a show for you. So yeah, that's a really great idea, Barb. I appreciate that. You had mentioned earlier just talking a little bit about how families access information. Would you like to talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. I think the real challenge, and this again isn't just disability specific, the real challenge is knowing what information to trust. This is a novel virus, which means we don't really know what we're doing. Everyone's doing the best they can to take like best guesses almost. And, you know, the information like about masks has changed like 10 times over time, but nevertheless, we're trying to take the best course to err on the side of safety. So I myself personally have found it hard to get good information. I forgot to say, as part of my story with Brandon, one of the ways we made an informed decision was to try to get some opinion from medical providers. So I think what's important is not to go on the internet and try to figure out whether or not the individual is at great risk or your family is, but go local. What's happening in another state is not what's happening here. What's happening in your county is not necessarily what's happening next door. And getting that information about your situation is so important. So I asked both our family member who has an underlying health disorder, asked the physician about the pros and cons or advisability of a family member who may be spending time in our home, going back into the workforce. And then we tapped into Brandon's primary caregiver to ask that question as well, to make that part of the mix. And both of them said, as long as you take the precautions that you need to take and you feel confident that the environment is one that is also taking these cautions, that they wouldn't advise against it. Now, I know other people whose primary care physician said, no, you should not expose them to that environment. And so I think where to get information is try to get it from reliable sources, not by Googling it on the internet. Organizations like the CDC, the Department of Health's updated information for our state, which you can search by county, can all inform it, but it still goes down to the place of business, your situation. There were a couple of people whose decision was greatly impacted by their roommate. So like in a group home setting, you have different constraints around making a decision about this. One of the individuals I spoke with who shared some great information about her young adult who has deaf blindness and has some autism layered on top of that, rooms with someone with a very significant compromised health set of issues because of a physical disability. So in that case, the individual who's self-employed at home with supports had to get really creative to find some workspace, not in the apartment itself, but in the apartment building, when they were shutting down all the common areas in this apartment building. But that was done out of concern for that roommate. And they did get creative, and they were able to find a little hallway with a table that could be set up at the end of that hallway to use for that workspace. And they got some support from the employment provider in getting that set up and then kind of monitoring that. But that's all to say, those sources of information can be specific to you, but they also have to take into account the needs of the support professionals. So in some cases, families had to switch to virtual support to get the individual set up for the day virtually, to walk them through what was going to happen rather than being in person with them. In other cases, as I said, out of respect for roommates or other people that you live with, individuals had to make different decisions. So PACER can be a source of information. We always direct people to the disability-specific organization, Down Syndrome Association, ARC for people with developmental disabilities, Autism Society, mental health. I'm forgetting the one for mental health. I'm so sorry.
I believe you're probably thinking of NAMI.
NAMI. They can give great input as well that's specific to your kind of main set of concerns. And then the medical community. And we've already talked about getting good information from the employers and the support providers. So I think those are all good ways to approach this. PACER can help you get directed to good sources of accurate information. We are not experts, but we generally say we don't know everything, but we pretty much know who does. And we'll try to get you connected to those people who can provide that information.
Yeah, I like that saying. We say that as well. We might not know the answer, but we'll find out who does if we don't know. So I appreciate that. That's all really, really great information. I think the audience can see why Minnesota ABSI asked you to be with us today, Barb. Really appreciate that. Well, with the time we have left, can you think of any other questions that families might have or you think they might have from the provider perspective?
Yeah, the questions I got in the, I talked to quite a few parents, and a lot of it seemed to revolve around what kinds of accommodations can you make? Like what's on the menu of options? Because beyond a mask, gloves, and washing your hands a lot, sometimes families aren't aware of the kinds of accommodations that could be made. And so I think families need to know more about what could be provided. One of the stories that I talked to a family about was an individual who is on the autism spectrum. He has some great skills that he's developed over work experience the last few years. He's in like his final year of the 18 to 21-year-old transition program, kind of time of life. But he has really high anxiety that requires outside, therapy. And he was offered this really great internship that could lead to a job. And they assumed when he was offered that it had to be in person. So they asked for an accommodation of limiting the in-person time and cited that he had these new skills that had been developed over the last 6 months of being able to do things virtually. He was worried about asking for that, but they were already with a backup plan of what if they say no, and they had to talk that all out. Well, once they made the accommodation request, that employer actually said, listen, we're not even going to make you come in 1 day a week. If you're just willing to come in 1 day at the beginning of this to get your equipment and get acclimated, and then one time midway through and one time at the end, we can make it work for you virtually. So I think having families need to know from all of the people involved, what are some possibilities about how we could make this work? Otherwise, the default in many cases, and in some of the parents I talked to, the default is, this is too scary. This is, one of the parents said, my 16-year-old had an offer. We can't send our 16-year-old out there not knowing how this is going to work. So they had to make a hard decision, and they didn't move forward with that. So somehow proactively helping families know, yes, these are some of the issues. These are some of the ways they've been addressed successfully. And let's talk together about some possibilities for heightened support, different support, or accommodations, and let us help you know how to make those requests, or the individual, how to help the individual make those requests.
Yeah, and I think you hit on a key point, which is sometimes you don't know until you ask. And
Exactly.
So for that one person that was given the accommodation of getting equipment and working from home, wouldn't have known that if they didn't ask. Many of the accommodations that the provider community are working on right now center around a lot of technology, of course, being able to do things
right.
Via Zoom. Like there's something in the process we use that was developed by Griffin Hammis Associates. It's called Discovering Personal Genius. And there's the opening kind of stage of the process is what's called a home visit. And we're doing those virtually now. So with, the person would at home have some type of, iPad or computer or phone. And the home visit would be that person would walk us around the home with the video, and we would ask our questions and see what's important to that person, that way.
Right. Can I add one thing that I feel like I really have to say,
please.
In respecting families. A lot of the things I've talked about today may not apply to all situations. I'm aware and talk with families whose individuals have really high support needs, and they may have needs that require really close contact. So this individual who's deafblind, for instance, when you need cued language, it's highly tactile, and it's literally in your face and on your body. That raises a whole different level of concerns. And also, in many of the cases of the people that I talk to whose individuals from their family are successfully working or successfully pursuing a job, families have had to rise to the task of providing more support themselves in many cases, and not all families are able to do that. So many of the families I talk to are, you know, they're the backup transportation plan for sure. They often are getting more involved if you've got to use technology. Not every individual can use technology, as you alluded to as well. So I just, you know, if families are listening and you're thinking you don't understand, our case is unique. We do understand, and I think we all need to work hard on it, but sometimes there is going to be a furlough period or a timeout for certain individuals. And in those cases, I just really encourage people to still keep the conversation going about, we expect you to go back to work, we're going to support you to go back to work, and to use that time to develop skills that will help them when they return to work, which I have some great examples of what some families did to set up work-related kinds of skill building in their home with support to take advantage of this time out, maybe from that in-person job.
Yeah, that's great. I would love to hear one of those examples.
Right now?
Yeah.
Okay. So a young woman who had been working for a catering company, as you can imagine, the catering company business kind of tanked there for a while. And so she was at home, but she did have some support that could work with her. And the parent was working at home as well. So they had some at-home time. And so they did things like had her inventory their home pantry, because inventory a pantry at the business was a skill that she was going to need to have, ordering supplies, and working on some specific catering skills that were job tasks that she was involved at when she was at work. So those were things that you could do within a home environment. Other individuals that I've talked to have used this time to ramp up the technology skills because whatever happens with COVID, I think we've entered a new level of the need to use technology. Mm-hmm. So they've really focused on where can we get support for that and how can we do that. So I just love that example of the catering company. When you think of all the applications at home to that, folding the napkins, doing the prep work for food, there's all sorts of things we can be doing that will increase their skills all the time, saying when you go back to work, not if you go back to work.
Right. Right. No, that's a great example and a really creative example of what one person did to kind of keep their skills up, sharpen their skills even while they were waiting to go back to work. And as you were alluding to as well, there is no, magic wand that can, just make every situation fit perfectly, and everybody's circumstance is unique. And certainly we understand, from the provider community that not everybody is going to have the same level or access to technology. And sometimes supporting somebody with that technology means that they have somebody there, whether it's whatever their residential support is, somebody there helping them with that technology. Sometimes that's part of the support plan, as well. So it's really about each individual situation, sort of looking at it and seeing what we can do. And so kind of going back to what kind of possibilities are out there for families. First, and I'm sorry to answer a question with a question, but the first thing is ask, get to know the organization. So this is because we as providers meet with each individual and their families, whoever is important in their team, one at a time. And we have certainly methods that we use, but no one situation or one person is the same. And so it's about, well, what kind of possibilities and what is needed, for this person. But certainly the technology, I know a provider that was actually able to get some grant money to even provide some iPads for people, that job seekers that were looking for work, so they could use those, during the process. So, I mean, that's just one example. Doesn't mean everybody watching today is going to get an iPad, but I mean, it's a way that that people are working to help. the example you gave about the additional, plexiglass for that one person was a great way to tackle that situation. And so it's really just kind of, person by person. We don't have any magic answers in terms of, we can't guarantee, 100% safety, but we couldn't guarantee that before the pandemic. It's about that, like you said, that cost and benefit in making those decisions. And it really gets down to that dignity of risk as well, and what is the right decision for each person to make. By no means ever throwing caution to the wind, but having those expectations and sort of peeling back the onion of what's possible, and being as creative as possible. But I can tell you that providers are taking the pandemic very seriously, and are providing services in ways that are as safe as possible, and respecting each individual's situation as well.
Good. I think families need to hear that.
Good. Good. Well, I appreciate it. Well, I think that's our time for today. It has been so great to see you again, Barb, and to spend this time with you today. And just a reminder, well, if you're watching this, you already figured out how to find it, but you can go to the Minnesota APSE website. It's mnapse.org. And there's a little YouTube icon on the bottom there, and that's where this podcast will be kept. But you can tell your friends about it and share that with them. If you have any additional questions for me, you can find me on the Minnesota APSE page under the Board of Directors. And Barb, if somebody wanted to reach out to you, how would they do that?
Probably the best way to do it is, well, you can visit our website, which is pacer.org, www.pacer.org. If you go to the National Parent Center on Transition and Employment link, then there's an email. So it's just transition@pacer.org. There's an email link. Our phone number, we're all working virtually, so I can be reached via Pacer's main number, 952-838-9000. Or you can email pacer@pacer.org or transition@pacer.org, and an advocate or a transition specialist will contact you. Or if it's something for me, I'll contact you, and we can set up a time to talk or communicate via email.
Fabulous. Fabulous. Well, thanks again, Barb, so much. On behalf of everybody watching, we thank you, and thank you for all the great work that you're doing. And Brandon, if you're watching, keep up the good work.
And I'm you said you have a kind of a tagline you often end with, and I find myself more than ever saying this at the end of conversations with families, which is my encouragement for you to keep hope alive.
I like that. I like that very much. And we will be keeping the Minnesota APSE podcasts alive. We think, but I'm not 100% sure, our next one will be with Alicia Munson. We have some other things that we're throwing around right now too, idea-wise, but we hope to definitely be back with you again very soon. So for now, I'll sign off on behalf of Barb and myself and Minnesota APSE. Thank you for spending this time with us today. And remember, if you believe it, you can achieve it.